Okay, so I'm going to speak in a little bit, but we are going to open up with two members of the local community first, just to make sure we know why we are standing in the middle of nearby a highway and some tall buildings. We'll start with Mr. Joe McDonald, then Miss Carol Matika.
My only distinction is that I'm a third generation West Ender. My grandfather came to the West End when he came to America in 1886, and he told me a few tales from that period. My father was born here. I was born here. If you look at the tall building, over the last tall building in the row, that's where I was born, but it was only 3 stories high and a brick building at the time. Fortunately, I was kicked out for being too poor when I was in the 8th grade, but I became rich enough to buy a condo. So when people ask me, how far have you come in life, I say about 40 feet. The destruction of the West End was brutal. It broke the hearts of many people. My father never really reconciled to it. Fortunately, I was young enough that I could start a new life in the wilds of Jamaica Plain. It was a great neighborhood. It was the only neighborhood before 1940 that was not one ethnic group. It was a mixture of ethnic groups. There was no majority. We kids played with one another. We paid no attention to that. Now, fortunately, Boston has many such neighborhoods. That is a good thing. But it was too bad they had to destroy the prototype. We are very grateful that the Brian Golden, who about 10 years ago gave a real decent apology to the West End people of the time about what the evils that had been done. We are very grateful that Mayor Wu has went on a campaign of abolishing the agency that did so much wickedness. We hope most of these area neighborhoods councils that had the power to override zoning laws, override normal laws of the state and so on, have been abolished. Mayor Wu has got rid of most of them in 2023. A few are still had to be carried on. They will be coming up in 2025. We are told the West End area is different because when it was established, it was made permanent. We don't want to be the last neighborhood left where an agency has the power to overrule the laws. So we definitely want to insist that the West End neighborhood development area be abolished in 2025, the same as all the others. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joe. My name is Carol Matika. I'm the president-elect of the West End Civic Association, and I want to welcome Mayor Wu and everyone to this event. You got a flavor of the deep, rich history of the West End from Joe, and I want to emphasize that as we look to the future, to build on the future of a thriving neighborhood in a thriving city. And what we're doing here today is a step in that direction. We have behind me the last tenement, the last building that remains from what was once the West End, replaced by towers of steel, a lovely garden-like community where I happen to live, but also a rich historic district in the Bullfinch Triangle, the last remaining section of this rich historic city. So we're here, I hope, in efforts to work together to build on that history, to work in a way that history and progress can not only work in concert, but can complement each other. The city of Boston has many, many examples of how that works together. Look around different neighborhoods. We can do that here in the West End, and I think this is a wonderful opportunity for the West End to use our rising voices to work with the mayor and all of our elected officials to accomplish what we can to establish and maintain a thriving community that welcomes diversity and improves progress. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much to Mr. McDonald and to Carol and the entire West End Civic Association. I'm going to find the right distance. Is that echoing still? I want to thank the West End neighborhood and community leaders and many from allies and advocates from across the city who have been a key part of getting us here to this day. I want to recognize some of our colleagues in government, on the city council, and in our administration. So thank you to Chair of the Government Operations Committee, Gabriela Coletta, who helped steer this ordinance through the amendment process and made it stronger with feedback from all the city councilors. Where's Gigi? Oh, it's right behind. I know Gigi has already had a long, full day already, as the two of us were together at the scene of the major fire in East Boston early this morning, and she and her team have been out there since the early hours of the morning, making sure residents were secured and safe and collecting their information to follow up with resources. So thank you, Councilor, for all that you do and the many, many things you do for our city.
Thank you, Mayor.
We're also here with, and you'll hear from in a little bit, your district city councilor, Sharon Durkin, who represents this neighborhood and several in this area, as well as city councilor Ben Weber, closer to my neck of the woods, but a key part also, vice chair of this committee and a lawyer who brings that expertise and advocacy to many, many issues. I want to thank our chief of planning, Arthur Jemison, and his entire team. We have several of his team members here, Diana Fernandez-Bibo, Devin Quirk, and I'm sure he'll introduce everyone else afterwards as well. Our chief of housing, Sheila Dillon. Thank you for all that you do for our city. Standing next to the administrator of the Boston Housing Authority, Kenzie Bach. Our chief of policy, Mike Firestone. Our chief of community engagement, Brianna Malore, somewhere. Did I see Ashley here too? Okay, our CFO, Ashley Grafenberger is here, along with our chief people officer, Alex Lawrence. And I also want to give a shout out to Priscilla. Is Priscilla still here? Priscilla Rojas, Madam Chair of the BPDA Board. Thank you for all you're doing to work with us and making the changes our city needs. And finally, in this area, they are more than elected officials, but to the leadership of WECA, the West End Civic Association, as represented by your president-elect, Ms. Carol Matika, but also Joe McDonald, who had to leave the neighborhood at 12 years old, Kevin Murphy, who had to leave the neighborhood at 6 years old, and Steve Zaidman, who had to leave the neighborhood at 8 years old. We are so glad you are here today, and whether at the Blackstone or nearby, that you are here in this community. So all of us are gathered here to make official one of the most foundational changes this city has seen, and to celebrate a long overdue new chapter in Boston's approach to how we grow. We are determined and taking action every day to be a city that is grounded in affordability, in resiliency, and equity. In other words, we are here for people. And that hasn't always felt like the first focus of some of the machinery and structures that Boston has had making major decisions. So it is important to start with grounding ourselves in the history of why we are standing in a little median here surrounded by highway traffic. As Carol said, we are in front of the last remaining building from that era of the West End, the last tenement. One of the only visual reminders of the thriving, diverse, supportive community of immigrants, poor and working class families who cared for each other, who advocated, and who were displaced. The official numbers were 12,000 residents and families forced to leave their homes with nowhere to go. But I've heard Mr. McDonald speak and others that the estimate from those who knew people was closer to 20,000 people or more. It represented an era around the country where development for the sake of new buildings sometimes took precedence over the impacts on people and on families. In the more than 150 years since the last tenement building was built, it was home to families from all over: Russia, Ireland, Germany, and China. Originally one of 30 brownstones that stood around it on all sides, now it is all alone, the lone survivor of the redevelopment and urban renewal that flattened this neighborhood. So it is here with great pride that we're here to officially welcome a new day in Boston and to codify changes that Chief Jemison and his incredible team have been putting in place for nearly 3 years now. Last Wednesday, the Boston City Council passed an ordinance to formally establish a city planning department and restore planning as a core function of city government accountable to the people of Boston. I want to thank our city councilors for recognizing just how critical it is in this moment, when housing continues to pose the greatest challenge for our residents, that smart, long-term, community-led planning will drive Boston's growth and development. Thank you to Chief Arthur Jemison and the entire team at the BPDA for the immense amount of work that has gone into putting this plan together over the last 2 years. Thank you to all the cabinet members and departments who collaborated and took on all the little pieces so that it would be possible to do this in a way that still protected the great work happening by all of our city teams up at the BPDA or now in the new department. We are changing the structure of our city government. We are changing the focus and the mission. But what we are not leaving behind is the hard work and talent of so many staff members, the functions that they perform around planning, development review, zoning, real estate, and research, and making sure that all of those functions are still working in concert together with every department of the city. I also want to thank and recognize some of the, a big piece of this along those lines under Alex's team was ensuring that all of the pensions and retirement systems and all the different systems that had built up over time, invisible to the larger changes that we're talking about, that maybe took the most work to sort out so that each individual person working in the space could be taken care of. And so between Alex and the BPDA, Tiffany Chu, our chief of staff, and everyone who coordinated on that, thank you for making this happen. I also want to thank those who may not be residents of this neighborhood, but who have helped steward this idea and the advocacy for this citywide for decades. There are two folks here or actually three folks I want to give a shout out to in particular who have been taking this on from all different angles across the city. You'll hear in a little bit from Armani White, who has been involved in numerous efforts, but who has helped guide and steward this in connection with community organizing. I also want to shout out Steve Hollinger, who has been probably more immersed in the details of planning in the BPDA than anyone in the city over decades, and Tony Disidoro, who is helping steer a new chapter in the city. He brings his neighborhood association leadership experience, but is also helping us steer Article 80 reform and change the processes that this new department will oversee. So, we have heard loud and clear from our communities that we need to be doing a much better job when it comes to planning for the future of our city together. And that means asking ourselves, who is this for? Who can afford it? Who benefits? And how do we ensure that we keep growing for the housing production, the vitality, the economic opportunity, and community that new residents in our communities bring? That requires a new level of intentionality to planning. The ordinance I'm signing today will codify the new planning department, moving planning and zoning, development review, urban design, that's the one I forgot earlier, and real estate under city council oversight. And it will enable the transition of funding from the BPDA to the city to account for the new staff and costs to ensure that this transition is budget neutral with no cost to Boston taxpayers. Most importantly, with a city planning department in place, accountable to the city like every other department, we can begin to codify how we plan and review development projects towards a model that is more predictable, more transparent, and more trustworthy. There's, of course, much work to do at a policy level, and we are working on all angles with the community, from rezoning through our Squares and Streets initiative, to Article 80 reform, to streamlining and improving our processes around our housing, affordable housing developments, and other proposals. But the ordinance I'm signing today is the biggest step Boston has taken in 70 years to finally begin untangling a system of planning rooted in an outdated ideology that has left scars in our community. So I can't wait to work with all of those who will be supporting and collaborating with our departments to plan for a future for every Boston family. Now I'd like to turn it over to our Chief of Planning, Arthur Jemison, who will be followed by our Chair, Gigi Coletta, then Councilor Sharon Durkin, Councilor Ben Weber, and then Armani White to close us out.
Thank you, Mayor, for your leadership. Today is a big day. Today marks an important step in our work to truly transform planning and development in Boston. We are building a 21st century planning department that can tackle Boston's greatest challenges and plan a city that's more resilient, affordable, and equitable. Having a planning department as part of the city will ensure that we're speaking to residents with one voice as the city, and it will allow us to make a clean break from the past and rebuild trust with community members that want to have a say in the way that their neighborhoods grow. The new planning department will continue to lead major initiatives in the mayor's agenda. By way of example, the modernization of the city's outdated zoning code, modernizing our development review process, planning and rezoning our neighborhood squares and main streets to allow for greater diversity of housing options, establishing zero net carbon from building emissions, establishing a design vision that reflects the diversity of our city and its built environment, and completing the disposition of land identified through our land audit as locations for housing. This change won't happen overnight. It took a long time to get here today, but it feeds into a bigger vision of a planning and development environment in Boston that's more accountable, transparent, and predictable. The next step, very essential, is ensuring a smooth transition for our staff, who, as the mayor said, are the reason we're able to take any of the steps we take and to continue the growth the city's been experiencing. In that vein, I do have some thank yous to make. I want to thank our BPDA board, led by our Madam Chair, Priscilla Rojas, who's behind me. I want to thank my deputy, Devin Quirk, who's been the leader inside the agency on these efforts. Devin, thank you. I want to thank our Executive Secretary, Teresa Paul-Hemus, and our General Counsel, Lisa Harrington, senior leaders like Carolyn Benass and Mike Kerr, Sam Vidal, Jeff Thomas, Lacey Rose, Pratapatros, and everyone else on my leadership team. Obviously, the CFO was essential to this. Thank you very much, Ashley. And our Chief of People, Alex Lawrence, has also been essential, along with Sheila Dillon, my day-to-day partner in all the work we do. Thank you to each of you for all your hard work. It's also really important to say this is a major transition, not just for our agency, but for the council. The council will now have a new and enhanced role in the way that the agency's oversight takes place. During that process, we really saw several leaders step forward to sort of take the mantle of being part of the process of oversight and growth at the agency. I want to specifically shout out Chair Coletta. Thank you very much for your leadership, along with Councilor Durkin and Councilor Weber. Thank you so much for the important role you played in advancing today's celebration. This is an important step, but it's just the beginning, and we're excited about all the things that we're going to be doing in the future. I pass it back to you, pardon me. I get the chance to introduce Chair Coletta for her remarks. Chair Coletta?
Thank you so much, Chief, and good morning, everybody. It's been a particularly tough morning, and so I just want to offer my deepest sympathies and support to all individuals and families impacted by the devastating fire in my beloved community of East Boston. So here today in the West End, we are taking a monumental step forward in Boston's planning and development history. The devastating effects of the harms inflicted by this agency can still be felt by Bostonians today, and especially so here in this neighborhood. This ordinance, bringing in planning as a core function of city government, is the first step of many to dismantle the archaic system that caused these harms to so many families. Mid-century land use tools and the regulatory structure that upholds them are simply outdated and do not work to adequately address issues affecting us today or that could tomorrow. Moreover, it is a system that was inherently designed to limit the input of community and uphold the status quo. From this ordinance, we can truly say that planning will dictate development and that the community has a greater say in holding all of us accountable. I want to thank Mayor Wu for her leadership in bringing this vision to reality. It is not easy, so I want to commend you. And members of her team at the BPDA, the finance team, HR, in their openness to making changes and to be collaborative throughout this entire process. I was honored to play a small role in its passage as chair of the Government Operations Committee. I want to thank my colleagues for their support and thoughtful feedback, which yielded additional transparency and accountability mechanisms baked into the new iteration of this ordinance. And yes, it also includes more checkpoints for community to have their voices heard throughout the entire process. So to close, again, this is the first step of many to democratize the BPDA and to right the wrongs of its past. I look forward to working with this new department to build a future that is affordable, resilient, and equitable, and to truly build to the inclusion of all Bostonians. Thank you so much. I now will pass it over to my colleague, Sharon Durkin.
Thank you so much, Chair Coletta, and thank you for your leadership. I think if you look over this way, you can see the greatest neighborhood park, the greatest neighborhood this side of heaven. We couldn't be in a more important place for this press conference, standing in front of the last tenement, the last standing building, and we couldn't have a mayor that understands that transformation of this particular city agency at this moment in time could not be more important. I'm so proud to stand alongside my mayor, and I'm so proud to stand in the West End with leaders from the West End Civic Association and others who also said they couldn't miss today because of how important it is. So I'm just grateful to look out and see many leaders. And I just want to say this historic moment that we're in of reimagining this agency, bringing it back underneath the city, and obviously still more work to do, but this moment in history and this moment we're in, I couldn't be more proud to be District 8 City Councilor and to be part of this moment in history, representing 5 diverse neighborhoods which touch development at every in every single different way, and also which was mentioned earlier today, historic preservation. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention today we have here Cass Capital and POA who are doing a transformational project at the West End Library, which realizes that notion of this is the greatest neighborhood this side of heaven. And I want to thank Chief Dillon for all of her work, making sure that people are housed in our city. Thank you. And I know I'm the district city councilor, so I'm supposed to speak the least. So I'm going to pass it on to Councilor Ben Weber. I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Durkin. I'll be even more brief. I grew up in New York City, where we saw the impacts of urban renewal gone awry, and you've seen that here in Boston. We've talked a lot about affordability, resiliency, and equity. Those are things I believe in fighting for, and I want to thank our mayor for fighting for those things and taking this on for us. I also want to thank Government Operations Chair Gigi Coletta. As the vice chair of that committee, I watched how hard she worked in shepherding us through this process, and I want to thank my fellow city councilors for passing this ordinance and making the city helping us make the city, more affordable, more resilient, and more equitable for everyone. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to keep this the shortest. My name's Armani White, Executive Director of Reclaim Roxbury, and you're probably wondering why is a guy from Roxbury talking at a West End event. I grew up hearing about the stories of West End and how it was essentially destroyed to make way for real estate development, and grew up hearing about the Boston Redevelopment Authority, the Black Removal Agency was what some called it, and the stories of how it also hurt and destroyed parts of Roxbury with the Campus High Urban Renewal Plan. And so the history of the BPDA, the BRA, and what it's done to our communities is not just a West End issue, it's a citywide Boston issue. And so this is such an important moment in our collective City of Boston history to have this agency now fall under the purview of the city and to have community members to be a part of planning. No longer will we be encouraged to support plans that are made for us. We're welcomed at the table to actually create the plans ourselves. So today's a big day. Hats off to Mayor Wu and to Chief Jemison and to those who've worked on this, and we're going to continue to advocate to make sure this is done right and done well. So congrats.
Okay, so why don't we do the signing, and then if the media has any questions, I can take them over off the side.
Stay down, down in front. Down, cameras. Sorry. You can't stay there.